How did your upbringing on a farm affect your choice of jobs?
I wanted to be on the radio from the age of 7 or 8, sitting in the farmhouse in southern Indiana, listening at night to the Chicago stations or those in Detroit, St. Louis, Nashville, wherever they were. Plus, I was out there in the daytime in the heat of summer on one of those unair-conditioned tractors. You didn't have a cab on some of those back in the day. I'd be out there sitting in the sun listening to that radio on the fender thinking, that guy's in the air conditioning. He's got the job. I'm out here sweltering in the heat. But I really had that fire to be on the radio. And in those days, you had to have a license to work at a local radio station. So the same summer that I got my driver's license, I also got my FCC license from the Federal Communications Commission to work at a local radio station, and I started about 300 miles down Halstead along Highway 1 at the town of Mount Carmel, Illinois, right across the river from where our farm was. And on those weekends when Dad didn't need me on the farm, I worked at that local radio station. A small market station, you did it all. I mean, everything. You were there on the weekend, so you had to keep the programming on the air. You played the records, you ran the commercials, you talked in between. You had to take the transmitter readings. The big transmitter that fed the tower was right across the other side of the wall, so you had to log those. Some stations required you to do it every 30 minutes in those days. If there was news and somebody called in to report an accident, road closure, you then became the news person. On the weekends, you were the station. And the last thing you did after you signed off the transmitter, that was a daytime only station. You could almost see the tower as far as you could hear it. A little gross exaggeration there, but it was a limited signal, 500 watts on 1360. And as soon as you turned off that transmitter, you'd go out and burn the trash in the barrel out there by the cornfield and set the alarm system, lock the door, set the alarm system, and head home. So you really had a wealth of experience there. You got to do a lot of different things that you wouldn't be doing actually later on in a major market where many of the jobs were indeed union specific.
What did you do when you started working for the Illinois Farm Bureau?
Illinois Farm Bureau fed a network of small market stations, places like Galesburg, Freeport, Illinois, Mattoon, Illinois, and the list goes on. However, there was also one big station on that lineup, and that was KMOX in St. Louis, which was very big at the time, still is pretty significant in the St. Louis market. And working with my boss at Illinois Farm Bureau, I said, let's approach KMOX. They're not doing anything in the way of agriculture. I can do a report in the morning that covers both Missouri and Illinois. And so I was the lead-in, actually, to a huge, highly rated show on KMOX in St. Louis. Bob Hardy and Rex Davis were the morning guys there. And they did a tremendous job, but they had a magnificent sports presence. Like being the Cardinal station and all of the legendary Cardinal broadcasters over the years, that were at KMOX. And so I was doing that every morning from Bloomington, Illinois, but I was also sending reports to WGN in Chicago, to Orion Samuelson and my predecessor, Bill Mason. If there was a big event downstate and I didn't see either one of those guys there, I would do a report and send it up. And so they would play it, of all things. And it was an on-air audition. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to be heard at the age of 24, I guess, at the time, on both KMOX and WGN, and then to be able to audition on the air. And I guess the report came in, the report would come into the engineers and master control. And Orion Samuelson told me later that they would flag it to his attention and say, hey, you need to listen to this guy in case we ever have an opening. And I was very, very fortunate that there was an opening not too many weeks later.
How did you end up in Chicago?
The Board of Trade used to have splendid press dinners, and this would be on the trading floor. The floor hadn't been cleaned up. Paper was all over the floor, but they would set up in the pit, in one of the pits. I don't remember if it was the corn pit or the bean pit. They would set up tables, a white tablecloth meal, superb meal, brandy, cigars. It was just a splendid event where the wire service reporters were there. very limited broadcast presence because not many of us were broadcasting, directly, the Chicago prices, unless you were 300 miles away or 500 miles away. Nobody was going to come in for the banquet. But I talked to my boss at Illinois Farm Bureau and I said, can I go? And so he allowed me to go. And Orion was there. And I went up to Orion and I said, Mr. Samuelson, my name is Armstrong. And he said, oh, yeah, yes, I've heard your reports. And I said, if you have an opening sometime, I'd love to talk with you about it. Well, that was July of 77. And by October of that same year, it appeared they were going to have an opening. So he called and said, would you like to come up and visit about it? And it was just a splendid opportunity, partly because of the magnificent scope of the WGN stations as a part of Tribune Broadcasting at the time. And it was complex at Bradley Place, 15 blocks west of Wrigley Field, was a huge broadcast factory at the time. You had the #1 rated radio station in Chicago, WGN, with its morning man, Wally Phillips, with Roy Leonard, Bill Berg, Bob Collins, really dominating the ratings, in 12 plus. Then you had WLS and you had WCFL in those days, WBBM. Then across the hall was WGN TV, where every morning, the middle part of the morning, the Phil Donahue Show was recorded. And then 1 hour later, the next studio was Bozo's Circus. So all of these audiences, live audiences, were coming into the building. All of the engineers were busy at work there. Before all of that started each day, early in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, Orion would host Top of the Morning on Channel 9, where he would sit down there and talk about the markets, talk about the weather, talk about the farm news, occasionally have a guest. And I was able to come in with him, join him then, John, after I got there, and host some of the Top of the Morning show. So it was a splendid place to go to work in broadcasting because it was so much happening at the time.
What was going on in the markets at that time?
We were right on the cusp of trouble. We had a lot going on in terms of exports, some great export programs. We got our first taste of trade sanctions in the 70s. And really, when you stop to think about it, in my personal opinion, having been to Brazil, I guess 5 times over the scope of years, starting in the late 70s, that really began the dramatic, rapid expansion when we embargoed, for one reason or another, sales of grain to the world. We then provided an ample opportunity and motivation for the Japanese, for example, to go into South America, invest heavily down there in Brazilian agriculture. They did just that, and that began the dramatic growth that we continue to see all of these years later. So it was a very interesting, pivotal time. There was a longshoreman strike that shut down agriculture exports for a period of time in the late 70s. But there were also very robust exports, and every afternoon, after the close of the market, every afternoon, you'd wait to see the bulletin on how much grain was sold to the Soviet Union. And you'd hear the dings of the machine, and you'd go look and see how many metric tons were sold to the USSR. It was a very active buying campaign. The Secretary of Agriculture was Earl Butz at the time. He was brought in by Richard Nixon. He was also Gerald Ford's Ag Secretary for a short period of time, the first of the 15 Ag Secretaries I've covered.